Good Tuesday afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Seth Joyner Show. With a little bit of sadness and heavy hearts, the Eagles season is over as they go down to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in the Wildcard round, 15-31. A lot to talk about, from the future of this quarterback, Jaylen Hurst, to the inefficiencies, if you will, of the coaching staff, and what this offseason is going to look at with the Eagles sitting with three first-round draft picks. They're actually going to be picking 15th, 16th, and 19th, and what Howie Roseman will do to improve this roster and a massive amount, I believe, cap space. It was very, very disheartening to watch this football team, go into the playoffs and really, not do much at all. There was such high expectations. I felt like, even though the team didn't play last week in week 18, that they would come into this game with a lot of excitement, with a lot of fire, and they look flat, to be honest with you. And to be honest with you, we kind of seen this, over the entire weekend. We watched Kyler Murray struggle. We watched Mac Jones, really struggle. And we also watch, our own Jaylen Hurst, look extremely inept through 60 minutes of football. And the one thing that I gleaned from that is that, these are all of these young quarterbacks' first time, being in the playoffs. And there's something to be said about that. I've always held the belief that when you go from the preseason to the regular season, the intensity level will ratchet up. And when you go from the regular season into the postseason, there's another spike in intensity, about 20 to 25%. One of the big mistakes that I think, in my opinion, and, I'm going to bring my good friend, Merrill Reese on in a sec to help me break all of this down. But I think one of the big mistakes that some of these coaches make, like Nick Sirianni did and Cliff Kingsbury did, is their approach was to their quarterback, hey, it's just another game. Go out and play it. Don't make it bigger than it is. That's not true. Because playoff football is a completely different animal. Now, I get why they did it that way. You don't want your quarterback rattled. You don't want him to get too high. You don't want him to be, overly exuberant. You're trying to keep him on an even keel. But playoff football is different. It is markedly different than the regular season or preseason football. Everything is heightened because every single play could potentially be the difference between winning and losing the game. That's the first thing. The second thing is the finality of the playoffs is you don't get a next week to come back and work on your mistakes, to rectify what you did wrong from week to week. Basically, when you lose, that's it. See you in August. See you in July. See you when the next season begins. So that mentality and that mindset, in my opinion, can be detrimental because, you have to figure out a way to get your quarterback and your team to raise their intensity level without it being overly consuming to them where they're doing things outside of the norm of what they would normally do. Listen, all's not lost because Jaylen Hurst, in my opinion, this was a great learning experience for not only him, but all the young players on this football team who've never been in this position before. And I think that experience, yes, talent is a big deal in the NFL, but experience goes a long way in helping these young quarterbacks to take the next step so that the next time that they're in this situation, they know how to psychologically and emotionally and spiritually deal with it. It's a learning process, It's a learning process every step of the way. And sometimes you got to get into the playoffs and be disappointed in order to be in the playoffs the next time to be able to take the next step and do what's necessary. Well, I don't want to do it all on my own. And the most indelible voice that you'll ever hear is the voice of the Philadelphia Eagles. He's been at it for 50 plus years. He loves our Philadelphia Eagles. But the one thing he does, he tells it like it is. And that's why I wanted to have him on to help me not only break down the season, but to break down what we saw in the playoffs and to also talk about the future of the Philadelphia Eagles. That is Merrill Reese. My friend, how are you?
I'm well, Seth. I'm just listening to the things you were saying, and you speak a lot of truth. You say a lot of things that I kind of had mulling around in my mind over the past 10 days. And initially, when I heard Nick last week at his media conferences, Nick Sirianni say, we're doing nothing different. This is, you want everybody to just keep their feet on the ground, be where their feet are, and take this in their minds as another game. It's not another game, but you don't want them all rattled and go out there and look at the glare of the lights and say, this is something different and come unraveled. And I understand why he said that. And he also said a couple of other things. He said, number one, there are guys on this team, a lot of remnants from the Super Bowl 52 champions. Not a lot, but there are certainly an important, a significant core of them. And with these other guys you're talking about, these young guys like, of course, Jaylen Hurst, Landon Dickerson, and Devontae Smith, you're talking about Alabama players who have played football at the highest level, and they have been in the NCAA championship game. They've been in the national championship. And what could be bigger than that? Well, the truth of the matter is, and it made sense to me, but the truth of the matter is an NFL wildcard game, in terms of the talent on the field, is way bigger than the national championship game. In the national championship game, even when you have great teams like Alabama and this year Georgia and other years Clemson and LSU, you may have between the two rosters, I'm saying this is a lot, you may have 30 players between those two rosters who will end up in the NFL. Right now, you're talking about football at its very highest level. Every one of these guys on the field was an elite player in college, every single one of them. And you get in there and you get young quarterbacks and young players, it is different. So I agree with you 100% as to the approach to the game. And I also have rethought something that I said the week before. It's interesting. I often say things and I have such conviction. And then 3 quarters later, I'm thinking, I'll give you an example about that. I said, I came on the broadcast at the beginning of the broadcast, and I said, here we go into the coin toss. I think it's important that if the Eagles win the coin toss, they have to take the football first. They cannot defer. They cannot let Tom Brady get on that field first, because he'll just go down in chunks, and by the time Jaylen Hurst comes out, he'll already be in a hole. That made sense to me, and our mutual friend Mike Quick agreed with me. In fact, I was secretly hoping that the Bucs would win the coin toss, because they would defer, because they can play that way. But the Eagles had to keep Tom Brady on the bench as often as they could. Now, a couple of quarters later, I'm thinking about what I said, and I'm saying, you know what? The way this game's going, if they kept Brady out for 3 series, it wouldn't have made a difference. That's how thoroughly they were dominated. Now, the other thing I'm talking about that I've rethought in the last couple of weeks, I said going into that final, meaningless in terms of the standings, the seedings, Dallas game, I think they're doing the right thing. I think the Eagles cannot afford to have an injury in this game. They have got to keep players safe. And, of course, they put Devontae Smith out there to win the rookie record, set the Eagles' rookie record, and they let Jason Kelce go out for 1 play and then come out so that he keeps his consecutive game streak alive. But thinking back, I think they lost something by not letting the regulars go out there for at least a quarter to keep things going. At least a quarter.
Well, Merrill, I will say this. I was one of the few people during the pregame show last week, week 18, that felt as though that it was a mistake. I just, from a player's perspective, I always want to be at the top of my game. I'm not one of those people, Merrill, that believes that, you protect players. The game is just it's too violent, it's too fast, and it's too unpredictable to be looking for perfection in such an imperfect game. Injuries are going to happen. And if a guy gets injured in week 18, you're not going to prevent it, because you could essentially sit your whole team and a guy go out in the first play of the game and get hurt.
Yeah.
So what have you really accomplished by doing that?
The only thing I would say is that Jaylen Hurst, for the last month of the season, has been nursing a high ankle sprain.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe an extra week wasn't bad in his case. And maybe it didn't make much of a difference, because he struggled for a lot of different reasons in this game.
Well, see, I like to look at patterns, and I like to look at patterns because patterns are a predictor of future performance. You can go all the way back to the preseason, and Howie Roseman has made this a mandate ever since Doug Peterson was here. Hey, we're not going to play our starters in the preseason. We're going to keep them off the field. We're going to make sure they're healthy. We're going to make sure that they're ready, once the regular season starts. Yeah. They did it last year. They came back. They did it again this year. And then the team got off to a slow start, and granted, they played some teams, they were upper echelon teams. They started off 2-5. But to me, the preseason, you should be working up, to the intensity hike by playing your players through preseason. Okay, you give them a series the first game. You give them 2 series the second game. You give them a quarter and a half the third game. So at least by the time, you're ready to step into the regular season, now they have some semblance of being ready to play. And that whole notion that, we played, I don't know how many games, throughout, that's nonsensical. So it didn't work in the preseason. You do it in week 18, and to me, it blew up in their face all over again, in the playoff game, because you saw a team that looked ill-prepared, not ready. The intensity wasn't there from the jump. And then you throw on top of that the play calling, and you just had the recipe for a disaster against, probably the greatest quarterback to ever play the game.
Yeah. I know I was vocal, as you know, during the preseason. I said going into the preseason that the regulars, particularly the young quarterback, needed at least 5 quarters in the preseason. I felt that he really needed a half in the maybe a half in the first game, a half in the second game, and a quarter in the third game. But he needed that to get ready. I think he had less than 10 snaps in the whole preseason. And to me, that was a mistake. And I think that was part of the reason they got off to a slow start. Now, that's not to say that Nick didn't do a lot of things right, because he did a lot of things right. And also, this was a team that did not have anywhere near the injuries that the team has had in the last decade. But so maybe that was an advantage. But overall, you can't waste the preseason. And another thing, Nick would say, well, we had these dual practices with the Jets and the Patriots, and they're like games. No, they're not like games. Only games are like games.
Exactly.
The dual practices are not games, and he needed game experience. But look, Nick Sirianni did a lot of things right. He set a very, very good mood in that locker room. He had a lot of players line up behind him, like him, and respect him. So I think overall, he did a very, very good job. He grew as a head coach throughout the season.
Well, I'm going to tell you this, Merle. I felt like, it was a learning and growing experience for not only the young quarterback, but also for the first-time head coach / OC. It was also a growing experience for, a defensive coordinator who had never called defensive plays before. But, for now, I want to focus in on Jaylen Hurst, because, listen, he had a rough outing, 2 interceptions, 2 sacks, really didn't get it going until garbage time. he just looked from the beginning like the moment was too large for him. He looked unprepared. And like I said earlier, that whole thought that it was just another game made no sense to me because, he kind of took that mode into the game. Now, we were in a position with the team making the playoffs unexpectedly that, hey, we've got our young quarterback. He is the guy of the future. Now, that performance on Sunday afternoon has cast a shadow over that thought for a lot of people. I'm not in that camp. I believe that, 3 first-round draft picks gives you the opportunity to improve this roster, and it needs improvement. If you go out and you bring in a 33 plus, and I say 33 plus because I don't see the probability of them bringing in Deshaun Watson. You bring in him, you're going to have to give up 2 first-round draft picks, minimum. Then you're going to have.
And who knows what else is involved in the baggage?
Well, I mean, he's gonna be sitting at least 10 games in suspension. So now you're going to be 2 years removed from having a guy that you trade with. So I wipe him off the board. Russell Wilson, 33 years old. Okay. Realistically, how many years does he have left in him? Or, the whole talk about Aaron Rodgers, who's now 37 years old. So now you're going to have to mortgage all of this draft capital that you've accumulated to bring in a quarterback. You've got a young quarterback still on his rookie contract that's probably going to make around $2 million next year, opposed to bringing in a guy that's going to be making $35 to $40 million next year. To me, it makes no sense. But there is that camp out there. There are those people out there, Merrill, that feel as though Jaylen Hurst isn't the guy, and we need to go get the guy. And my problem with that is, this is my last point, and I'm going to just let you go with it. If Jaylen Hurst was taken number 1 overall, or if he was taken number 2 overall, our outlook as far as his progression and what his ceiling could potentially be would be different. Because he was a second-round pick, everything gets sped up. And to me, that's unfair. That's really unfair. He should be afforded the same latitude if they feel like he's the guy that a guy being picked in the top 10 would be, to grow, because he has to experience the game. He's got to grow. He's got to mature. He's got to learn the offense. He's got to learn what defenses are trying to do to him, and that takes time.
I could not agree more with anything you said. I have been a Jaylen Hurts guy from the time he played in his last year at Oklahoma, where he was the runner-up for the Heisman Trophy. And he had some very good games in Alabama also. He's a very bright young man who finished his degree at Alabama, did graduate courses at Oklahoma, comes from a football family. His dad was a coach. He's made of the right stuff. I'm not somebody, Seth, who fluctuated. There are guys who say, oh, he's terrific. And then the next week, he doesn't have this. He doesn't have that. He's clearly not the quarterback of the future. He can't throw. All he can do is – no, I don't believe any of that. I believe Jaylen Hurst has a lot of talent. The biggest mistake that I have seen, and I've seen almost – I can't tell you how many writers I respect, and yet I continue to see them write this. And they write that he does not have a strong arm, that he's got to do it alone on his legs, that his arm strength is moderate. That's not true. At the Combine, the only player who outthrew him in terms of velocity was Justin Herbert. Justin Herbert threw it at 55. Jaylen Hurts threw it at 54 miles an hour. I have been at practices, and I've watched him throw every pass. The bomb, that 50-yard loop downfield, the rainbow, is not a measure of a quarterback's arm strength. You measure a quarterback's arm strength with the velocity that he has on that 20-yard out pattern, where he's got to throw it from one side of the hash marks and get it there in no time flat to keep the linebackers from intercepting the ball. Watch him throw that. He throws a rope. Now, you watch somebody like Taylor Heineke, who had his good games, but when he throws that out pattern, you see a loop to it. Jaylen Hurts has plenty of arm strength. Doug Peterson said to me last year, he said, there is not a throw that he is incapable of making. I asked Nick Sirianni, where do you rate Jaylen Hurst, just on arm strength, nothing else. He said he has an above average NFL arm. His arm is stronger than the NFL average. So I'm not going to tell you he can throw it as hard as somebody like Josh Allen, because that's another category. But he throws it. He has more. How about this? He has more actual arm strength than Tom Brady. I think you'd agree with that. And but now there are a lot of other things in the mechanics. It's more than just a strong arm. He's got to be able to read quickly. The ball where he rolled out to the left and then threw into the end zone that was picked off was a rope. The problem there was he waited too long. Right. And he also needs a lot of practice. I was talking to Mike Quick today, and I said, I get to the stadium very, very early. I'm somebody who leaves the house at 8:15 for a 1 o'clock game because I want to know that if I get 4 flat tires, I can hitchhike my way to the game. So I get there so early. And I talked about when Peyton Manning used to come in with Indianapolis, and I'd be getting into our broadcast booth and unpacking my briefcase, and it's about 9:45 in the morning. And all of a sudden, I'd look down, and there were 2 people. There were actually 3 people. The national anthem singer testing the microphone, Peyton Manning, and Marvin Harrison. And they would stand there, the 2 of them, going through every route on the tree. And then he would throw 40 and 50-yard fly patterns to Marvin Harrison. And they would work up for a sweat for about 20 minutes, just working on the timing, on synchronizing the movements. And we never saw anything like that. Their practices were short. I'm sure he was willing to stay after practice, but there was a lot. And this wasn't rookie Peyton Manning. This was 10-year veteran Peyton Manning or 8-year veteran Marvin Harrison. They work and work and work at things like that. That's not a matter of just arm strength. It's a matter of practice, and that can be developed. Jaylen Hurst is 23 years old, the youngest Eagles quarterback to ever play in a playoff game. I think we've just seen the very beginning of where he can go. I think he has a very high ceiling. And when you go with one quarterback, look, they had to get rid of Carson Wentz last year. There was no choice there. So you go through Carson Wentz, and then you go to the next quarterback, and then you went for a while. You brought in Chip Kelly for some reason, brought in Sam Bradford, and then there was Nick Foles. And then they go through what I like to call the quarterback carousel. You go through the quarterback carousel, ultimately you don't have a good team. You're changing here, you're changing here. And, the New York Jets have done this for years. They have a quarterback in for a while to get rid of him. You do that enough, you become the New York Jets.
Well, listen, I'll say this. There's no denying, in my football opinion, that the kid has got, what it takes. Does he have some things that he lacks?
Yes.
Well, absolutely. I think that, his ability to, and I don't know how plays are called for him. It's so difficult to decipher and disseminate what's really going on because we don't have an insight to how he and Nick Sirianni really act and interact together. So it's hard to tell. But the thing is, these are the things that I like to see him spend some time in the offseason, figuring out how to improve. You talk about his arm strength. I don't think his arm strength is the case. I think that he needs to learn how to anticipate his throws. The college game is so different than the pro game. Guys are wide open on a collegiate level. On the pro level, you either have to throw guys open or you have to anticipate throws in order to get completions because it's very rare. It's a busted coverage if a guy is wide open. It's a guy, it's a missed assignment or a guy just got juked out of his shoes if a guy is running wide open in the NFL. And that doesn't happen very often throughout the game. His ability to throw the ball with proper trajectory. There are some balls that I believe he throws too high and that needs to just be thrown on a rope. And we know that he has the ability to do that.
Sure.
we saw in the Chargers game, where I thought he made a massive improvement, where he was making a concerted effort to manipulate the pocket in a way that bought him time, sliding and stepping and moving. He's got that has to be more prevalent in his game. His ability to get through his progressions faster rather than locking on one side of the field, because there are a lot of times where there are things that are available to him on the other side, even though his progression goes from left to right. Something on the right side might be wide open, but he's got to learn how to scan the field instead of just locking in on one and then going to two. And then the other thing is, how do you broaden your vision? So if you've got a 1-2 read from left to right, how do you broaden your vision so you can get 1 and 2 in your vision as you're looking that way instead of going 1 and then 2? That's something that the great quarterbacks do. The other thing is, listen, this is probably the 5th system that he's had to learn in the last 5 years.
He changed offensive coordinators every year.
Every single year. So getting him in a system that he knows like the back of his hand, that he can close his eyes and he knows where every guy in the route is and where his outlet is on every single play, that's huge. Those things are huge. Now, those are things that can be worked on. Those are things that can be improved upon. I'm a fan, and I want to see the guy have another year because I understand the process, Merrill. You know, more times than not, most of the times, and most people, I got people on here that are clicking, but what about Joe Burrow? Listen, there are anomalies. There are anomalies in this game. Joe Burrow is an anomaly. Justin Herbert is an anomaly.
But those are just two.
Yes.
Kyler Murray was the first player picked in the draft, and he wasn't as good last night he was just as bad. I shouldn't say as good. He was just as bad last night as Jaylen Hurst was Sunday.
Well, but my point being, Merrill, is that, I believe that the average player, the above average player, it takes him 3 years to really understand how to play the pro game, how to mature into the pro game, okay? Barring that he doesn't get the time to play on the field. If he's on the field and he's playing, by the time you get to year 3, that's when you look for your greatest leap, your greatest improvement, So I would expect that Jaylen Hurts coming back next year with Nick Sirianni being the play caller, having a full year of starting, playing with these guys again, and obviously with some improvements, to the roster, that we should see a massive jump and a massive improvement in his play next season.
I agree. And I think what you pointed out before about the draft choices, first of all, is there a quarterback in this year's draft? And I can name a lot of them. I can name Kenny Pickett from Pitt. I can name Matt Corral from Ole Miss, and I like his arm. I can name Malik Willis from Liberty. There are others right on that. Sam Howell from North Carolina. I can go on and on. I have the whole thing in my head. There's not one of them that I think is going to come right out of college and take the league by storm. There's not one of them that I would rather have next year than Jaylen Hurst. So you also made the point about why would you give up 2 or 3 first-round draft choices for a quarterback who may help you initially, but is going to set the franchise back 3 to 5 years with the first-round picks that they could get. Now, I'm one who believes that the Eagles may have to trade 2 of those first-round picks, or at least a first and a second, to move into that top 10. They're not going to get Aiden Hutchinson, the edge rusher from Michigan, because he'll be gone by then. But you could get the guy on the other side, David Ojabo, who also had 11.5 sacks. You could get Jordan Davis, the 6'6", 360-pound defensive tackle from Georgia, who would wreck somebody's offensive line. You could get Kyle Hamilton, the 6'4" safety from Notre Dame, because everybody knows this team needs an impact safety. This team needs somebody like Seth Joyner, who was a difference maker on the defense. You need a difference maker. I can think of some very good players and some guys who had good seasons. Josh Sweat had a pretty good season rushing the passer. Look, Darius Slay had a good season. Big play Slay. He's going to the Pro Bowl. He had a good season. Javon Hargrave had an uneven season, very good early, but then kind of faded late. But the truth of the matter is, there's nobody that you can really look at right now who you would say he's a difference maker, the way Fletcher Cox was 3 years ago, where Fletcher Cox was disrupting offenses. There's nobody out there who disrupts. There's no Brian Dawkins. There's nobody like that right now. And that's what this team has an opportunity to get in the first round.
Listen, I agree. You know, I love the kid Nakobe Dean from
Georgia.
From Georgia. I don't believe that the Eagles value that position enough to use one of these 3 draft picks on him. But I think that he would be a difference maker. You watch him play.
Yeah.
He plays with a motor. He holds other guys accountable. He's extremely intelligent, you know, graduated in 3 years. I like what he brings to the table.
Me too.
And to your point, you know, listen, you have to have, in order to have a great team, in my opinion, a great defense, I think you have to have a playmaker, a difference maker at every level. I think you need to have, you know, a defensive lineman that's dominant. And I mean dominant from not just dominant sometimes. I'm talking about game in, game out. That he can flip the situation defensively at any time. You got to have a playmaker at linebacker, I believe, because we're not playing with 4 linebackers or 3 linebackers anymore. There's only 2, and sometimes situationally you're thrust in dime package where you only got 1 linebacker on the field. So that guy he's got to be a difference maker. And in my opinion, you can have great cornerbacks. You have to have great cornerbacks. But you need one difference maker at safety where he's a Swiss Army knife. You can put him in the hole. You can put him in the box. You can bring him up and blitz him. A guy that does a little bit of everything, you know, and you can use them and place them and put them in positions to be difference makers. And when I look at this Eagles defense, I'm hard-pressed to find a difference maker on any level.
No,
on any level.
You talk about Tampa Bay. Look, they play a 30 defense. But look at those front 3. You're talking about Ndamukong Suh, even though he's 35 on one side, William Golston on the other side, and 700-pound or whatever he is, Vita Vea in the middle. I mean, that's a force. That's a force. And they still have guys like Jason Pierre-Paul who can disrupt. I mean, right through that team, there were difference makers on both sides of the ball. This team does not have they have some good players. They have some good players, but there's no big difference maker on this defense.
Okay, so I want to transition over to Nick Sirianni and want your opinion. I heard you say earlier, you know, that he did some really good things. I want to start with the playoff game and then work back through the season.
Okay.
I think at points in times in last week's game, I thought Nick was extremely stubborn in his play calling, Merrill. Tampa Bay lined up probably 60% of the time in a cover 3 with their corners off the ball, 8 to 9 yards, and they were just, backpedaling on the snap of the ball. And I thought that, the hitch route, the quick out route, the 10 to 12 yard stop route was there to be had all day long. The 5-yard speed out, which would have gotten us ahead of the chains instead of us trying to throw the ball across the middle on first down, incomplete, come down and run it on second down for a gain of 1, and then putting your young quarterback in a 3rd and 9 situation. I thought that he was, extremely stubborn in his play calling. Also, his failure to adjust. Now, the Eagles have done a really good job of starting slow. That's not a good job, but the good job that they've done is they go in at halftime, make adjustments, and come out in the second half, and really get it right. But this game is really about adjustments. Can you adjust on the fly? Can you look at what the defense is giving you and decipher what you can take, what you can have? And I thought the biggest mistake that Nick made was not just taking what was obviously there. Put Jaylen in a position where he can succeed. Take what the defense is giving you, okay, and keep the chains moving. I mean, I don't think they got a first down until the second half, I believe it was. And that's unconscionable when you've got cornerbacks that are playing 10 yards off the ball.
Well, I think they had some in the first half with some passes to Dallas Goedert. But what disturbed me, and again, you have a better, believe it or not, you are better able to judge this than I, because as a play-by-play man, my eyes are on the ball all the time. So I'm not, now Mike Quick has the ability in a normal situation to judge what the defense is doing. When we're back at the lake looking at a TV screen as we were, it's not quite the same thing. But here's the other thing that did cross my mind. Why was it almost until the end of the first half that they finally went to Devontae Smith, who is their one difference maker wide receiver? I mean, he was nowhere near as active in that game plan. Now, Nick may say, and I have no way of knowing this, Nick says, I think, that there were opportunities and there were plays that Jaylen checked out of, or defenses that made that play that was called unwise to go to him at that point. But I just think that when I see these other wide receivers who are making differences and are all over the place, I mean, Odell Beckham last night, he's great, but certainly Devontae Smith has extraordinary skills. Why not go to him more? You've got
that therein lies, my criticism, if you will. If you know that your top two guys are, your Devontae Smith and Dallas Goedert, then you got to figure out creative ways to get them open and get them the football. Okay. Now, if you felt like Jaylen was checking out of some situations that weren't, the best choices to be made, then when you come off after 3 straight 3-and-outs, okay, let's reassess, what we're doing here. Okay. They're giving us cover 3. If they're giving us cover 3 and he's the X receiver on the weak side, okay, I can run a 5-yard speed out all day long and I can have that whenever I want it. Okay. Now you force coverage. You force them to adjust their coverage. The other thing was, okay, you got Dallas Goedert. When they want to play quarters or they want to play quarter halves coverage, okay, that means that your 3 underneath guys, each guy is responsible for a third of the field. You got one guy dropping outside for the flat, from the hook to the flat on the other side, and one guy that's responsible for the middle of the field. That's an opportunity to get Dallas Goedert one-on-one inside with a linebacker that's dropping. All he's got to do is just sit down at 5 yards and toss the ball there that's 5 yards. Or even if he matches in that zone concept, okay, where's your routes that says, okay, we're gonna work into him and work away. We get him overplaying one way, we work the other way, and then eat up those guys on the outside with the underneath routes, and you got the middle of the field is wide open. I mean, those kinds of things make me wonder. Listen, you got 1,000 coaches on the coaching staff now. Half of them are sitting up in the box and they're watching the game. Okay. And I get it. The Nick Sirianni, he's the one that's making the calls. But those guys are up in the box they're up there for a reason. They're giving you personnel. They're giving you down and distance. They're giving you all of this information. And you mean to tell me all those guys up in that box couldn't see what was obviously there to be had, and they never took advantage of it until the game was over?
Yeah. Well, let me ask you something else, Seth. And I'm not about to pile on Jalen Reagor. His name has been mentioned far too many times on the talk shows since that game ended. Actually, probably been mentioned far too many times from game 1 or 2 right through the 20th game of the season. I mean, he is the guy everybody's beating up, and he hasn't had a good season, and he hasn't been what they hoped that he would be as a first-round draft pick, especially when he's picked ahead of Justin Jefferson. But here's my question to you. And again, these guys did a great job. Nick did a great job. The team made a lot of strides this season. But I keep saying to myself, Why is he out there when a little guy wearing number 84 by the name of Greg Ward always gets open and 99% of the time holds on to the football? He makes plays. He did it into the Washington game when Jaylen was forced out of the pocket and had to run for his life. And Ward mirrored him across the field and curled up inside the 5-yard line, and Jaylen Hurst hit him with a bullseye. And then there was another play where he threw a back shoulder touchdown pass to Greg Ward. And he's done this stuff. The two of them can link up. Wouldn't he be a more appropriate weapon than what Jalen Reagor has been giving you?
Well, Merrill, I think both of you and I know the answer to that question. Absolutely. I mean, it's not even a question. But you have to ask, who's making the decisions here? You do everything that you can to try to get this guy involved in your offense because, according to Nick Sirianni, he believes that, he's a playmaker. And he's yet through 2 years to prove to us that he is that playmaker that everybody says or believes that he is. He's dropping punts. He fumbles a punt that was, extremely was a big deal in this game because he was afraid of the contact. Even though if you're going to fair catch it, you have the right to run as fast as far as you want to be able to get the ball. Why would you stop and sit down and not catch that ball? But the question is, and I posed this on Twitter a couple of weeks ago, how long can the Eagles continue to waste a game day activation on J-Jaw, and at the other end of the spectrum, go on with this belief that Jalen Reagor is a number 2 wide receiver when they have shown and they have proven that neither one of them, are viable? You have to pull the plug. You have to be willing to say to yourself, you know what? Hey, we made a mistake. There's nothing wrong with admitting that you made a mistake, okay? Because it's evident to everybody else. Okay, so it's all right for you to just say, you know what, hey, I made a mistake. Okay, let's call up John Hightower. Let's activate and get Greg Ward more involved with the offense, whatever it is that we need to do. But we're only getting production out of 2 guys, and these other 2 guys, one guy's playing special teams. When he comes in the game, you know why he's in. They're going to run a bubble screen, and he's out there to block. He's not out there to catch passes. The other guy, he can't get out of his own way. He's like Sleprock. He's got a cloud, a rain cloud, with a thunderbolt, just over him at all times. He can't even get out of his own way.
Listen, he'd be better off someplace else next year where he needs a fresh start. He can't come in front of this crowd again next year. That every time he looks the wrong way, he gets booed. I mean, he needs a fresh start, and maybe who knows? He's a good guy. I hope he comes into his own, and maybe he will, but it's not going to be with this team. Now, we talked about the draft a little bit, and I told you my plan is to, if you have to, take 2 first-round draft choices and move into that top 10 and get the difference maker. But with that 3rd pick, maybe it's 19, maybe it's 1 to 15, the guy I would like, now I know I'm a Penn State fan, but I would love to see them take Jahan Dotson, who is blindingly fast, ultra productive, and what they sorely need is an impactful return man. And he is lightning. He's a great returner. He's a tremendous wide receiver. Mike thinks he's a little small. He likes the bigger receivers, but Jahan Dotson can really play. He's about 5'10 and a half, 5'11, and maybe 185, but he's a really, really special player. If you have him in the lineup and you have Devontae Smith in the lineup, you're ahead of the game right there.
So let me ask you this question. Is it possible, because I've tracked it, the Eagles have drafted 12 wide receivers in the last 11 drafts. Mm-hmm. Can they possibly go back into this draft and draft a 13th receiver in 12 drafts? That is way too much draft capital to be wasted on one position. And it's like, what are we doing when year after year after year? And to your point, we need another wide receiver.
But they got it right. They got it. In fact, to the Eagles' credit and to Howie's credit, they had a wonderful draft this year. When you talk about Devontae Smith, Landon Dickerson, Milton Williams and Kenneth Gainwell, and then some of these young guys we don't know yet, like Zach McPherson, Jacoby Stevens. They had a very fine draft. I'd give them an A for this year's draft.
Merrill, I do too. But you know what? The thing that they did is Howie didn't go off the reservation. He pretty much followed the draft board and where the players were supposed to fall. And because he knows now that the heat is on and that accountability thing is a big deal. I don't expect for him to really go off the reservation this year. The guys that he picks with these picks will be the guys that are slotted where they're supposed to be, will draft according to best player available, and he'll make some good picks. But I'm just not so sure that we can afford, with all the other needs, especially on the defensive side of the ball, to spend one of those draft picks on another wide receiver.
Just one. Just one. Just give me that one more impact wide receiver to give Jaylen Hurst another weapon.
How about in free agency? Because we're gonna have some cap space. Can we get him in free agency, Merrill?
Well, you know, Billy Warndell brought that up to me. Our spotter, Bill Warndell, and you know Billy. He believes he's a general manager. He's worked with our lads' guide to the NFL draft. I mean, he can tell you who the third string left tackle is at Liberty. I mean, that's how into this whole thing he is. But he starts bringing up the free agent wide receivers, and I said to him, "Give me one that you would go after." And he said, "Well, Allen Robinson, another Penn Stater, but he's hurt a lot." Now, there's two you can love. Two you can absolutely love. Chris Godwin and Michael Gallup. Both are terrific wide receivers. Both are coming off of ACLs and didn't finish the season. You know, you tear your ACL, it may take you 2 years to be back to what you once were, if you get back that way. But you're generally not the same player in under 12 months. I don't want somebody coming off an ACL.
Well, it's a little different.
You want Calvin Ridley? Ridley, who's had all kinds of problems in Atlanta. Great player, but he missed the overseas thing. He's had anxiety problems, and I'm sympathetic to all of these things. Right. But the Eagles don't need more problems.
I think that, you know, the fact that they're coming off an injury means you're not going to have to pay top dollar for them. You're going to have to pay more than their current teams are going to want to pay for them. But you might be able to steal one of them, and I think it might be worth it if you can get them on.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean it's a risk, but you know, if you do it the right way, if you take the risk on a 1 year prove it or a 2 year deal, you know, then it makes financial sense, you know, maybe for the risk, not on a long-term deal. But their respective teams, like Dallas is not offering gosh, what's his name? They're not offering their guy top dollar.
Gallup.
You know, Gallup. They're not offering Gallup. And Tampa Bay is not going to offer Godwin top dollar, you know, coming off of ACL. So there might be an opportunity for Howie to work some of his magic to be able to go in and steal one of those guys. And they're still young enough coming off, you know, their first contract to make it make sense. And if they prove themselves and they do well, guess what? You know, we can go back and sign them to a long-term deal later on. I just got reservations about, you know, how much draft capital we've spent and how many misses we've had at the wide receiver position.
But they did that with Mike Wallace from Pittsburgh a few years ago, and again he got hurt right away.
Right. All right. We as time winds down, Merrill, I got to get into, you know, this lightning rod, Jonathan Gannon. I'm watching this game on Sunday, and I'm remembering back to the Thursday night loss. And I said to myself, my gosh, he didn't learn anything. The same defenses that he employed in that Thursday night game is the same thing he's trying to do at this moment in the biggest game of the year. And Tom Brady is just having his way. You know, just passively, bend but don't break. The defense is stagnant and stable all the time. They don't move. The cornerbacks don't move up and back. They don't play outside and inside sometimes. The linebackers, pretty much where they line up, they're going to line up. You don't see a whole lot of line stunts to confuse protections and things of that nature. So sometimes you don't get the type of pressure up the middle that you really need because the offensive line knows where the rush is coming from and where the guys are lined up. I mean, it just goes on and on. The soft coverage, Merrill, I'm blown away. I'm blown away that this young man is a head coaching candidate in the NFL after what we witnessed with this defense this year. And a lot of people will say, oh, but at one point in time, we were the number 5 defense in the NFL. 9th against the run, 9th against the pass, 5th overall. Well, let's go back and look at the first 7 games. What were we ranked there? Okay. And then we played against the Sisters of the Poor the second half of the season, and statistically, the team looked extremely good. Okay. So you're going to tell me the organization will look at that string of 8 or 9 games and say that that's worthy of looking at this guy as a head coaching candidate?
See, here's my thought about this, and this is not necessarily about Jonathan Gannon. You always get a close up these days of Buffalo's offensive coordinator, Brian Daboll. Mm-hmm. Oh, he's going to be a hot head coaching candidate. I don't know why. You see, I think a head coach and a coordinator are two completely different things. I think a coordinator can be a genius of what he does, but not have the personality, not have the presence, not have the authoritativeness, all of these other things that make a great head coach. Do you know, Seth, I'm going to ask you a question that you can probably come up with the answer of. With all the coaches that I have met over the years, and if I were to give IQ tests, the most brilliant defensive coordinator I have ever known in my 103 seasons, okay? Who do you think I would name? The most brilliant defensive coordinator?
It'd probably be a toss-up between Jim Johnson and Bud Carson.
Okay. You were right there. It would be a toss-up between Jim Johnson and Bud Carson. But I was thinking of Bud Carson and how brilliant he was. Looked kind of like if he was out of the office and you just saw Bud Carson, you'd say, he's probably an English literature professor over. That's what he looks like. Mild-mannered, gray hair, very cerebral. That was Bud Carson. But Bud Carson was a head coach in Buffalo and a head coach in Cleveland and could never do it. But he was good enough to build a steel curtain defense in Pittsburgh, and he had the Eagles defense in 91, first against the run, first against the pass, first overall, greatest defense in Eagles history, and the best. But he was not a head coach. Others I can think of. Jim Johnson went out to San Francisco for an interview, but never really was a serious candidate. Again, great defensive coordinator. In fact, I believe that the NFL Hall of Fame should have coordinators, great coordinators, in the Hall of Fame. Mm-hmm. Buddy belongs in the Hall of Fame, not as a head coach, but for what he did for defenses.
Right.
Head coaches are a different animal. I want to see them. I want to see them talk. I want to hear how they lead. The 3 guys who came out of this team of the 4 that I knew right away they were going to be good head coaches. One was Jeff Fisher. I thought he had it. The other was John Gruden. I thought he would succeed. The other was John Harbaugh. I thought John Harbaugh was made to be a head coach. I mean, you could feel that. I knew Wade Phillips was a terrific defensive coordinator, but I never saw him with that laid back, easy personality. I never saw him as a head coach. I never thought he would be. I never saw Brad Childress, somebody I thought was going to be a really successful head coach, although he was a great guy. He was a wonderful assistant to Andy Reid. I will tell you that I thought Frank Reich would be a successful head coach, and he still may very well be a successful head coach, just didn't have a good year. But the fact of the matter is they look at these coordinators. Last year, every time you saw San Francisco, there was a big close-up of Robert Saleh. And I don't know what they're doing. He may turn out to be fine. Was he San Francisco? Well, he wasn't. Yeah, San
He was
Francisco.
San Francisco D coordinator.
And so far, I don't know about his personality. The other brain who was supposedly being considered here is Josh McDaniels, great offensive coordinator. Did not succeed in his one stop in Denver. He was in and out of there pretty quickly. Eagles gave him a full day's interview, and I think he was a serious candidate. Maybe he'll be great in his next chance. Maybe he won't. But I think there's a lot more to being a head coach than being an offensive or a defensive genius.
Okay, so let's erase that question. And I want to leave the next 3 minutes to you to talk to me and tell me what you thought as you were calling this game, as you were looking at this defense and what they were trying to do.
I thought they were overmatched, this defense.
Even with all the pieces that were gone, I mean, you basically had two guys that you had to account for. You had to account for Gronk, who they made an early decision not to really go to a lot, and you had to account for Mike Evans.
Yeah, and you also had to account, they still had other people you had to watch out for. They have three great tight ends, not just Gronk. They have O.J. Howard, and they have Cameron Brate.
Cameron Brate.
He's pretty good too. And Rashad Perriman can get open. And the other guy they went to, Johnson, Tyler Johnson, he missed the first ball, and Brady gave him the evil eye. And from there on in, he didn't dare drop anything. He made some big catches. So and I thought, and then they brought in their backs. They didn't have great backs, but they were competent backs. They were backs who, if given a hole, could run. I mean, they had Keyshawn Vaughn, and they had they had Bernard. Giovanni Bernard. I think I once called him Christian Bernard, who was the first surgeon who ever successfully transplanted a human heart. Mike said that's not him, but they did have enough pieces, and plus the other thing, Seth, I'll tell you what I still to this moment, when I think about this, I am still aghast when I saw Tom Brady flip a pass into the end zone to Gronk, and there wasn't anybody within 10 yards. They left Gronk open. You don't have to leave Gronk open. He'll kill you. They left him alone.
I can tell you this, Merrill, from experience. We used to have defenses where we were straight coverage on the goal line, but we had defenses where we were all out playing the run. And the mindset was, hey, if they throw it, guess what? They got us. That's what that play looked like, is they were selling out 100% for the run, and they had no care whatsoever about who was covering who. But I don't know, man. I'm going to tell you, listen, I respect the fact that you believe that they were overmatched. I believe that they were more overcoached than they were overmatched. And when you got Tom Brady and you can protect him the way that they protected him and run the ball the way that they ran the ball to create some balance for him, I just felt like they were out. I think Jonathan Gannon was out coached. That's my
listen.
My
you have the expertise to say that, but my whole outlook going into this game, I felt. Here's the thing, Seth. This team, I hope I don't aggravate a lot of people when I say this, but what the NFL did this year in expanding the amount of teams going into the playoffs was give a lot of cities a chance to be excited for almost 16 weeks as their team, their not so terrific team, was a shot to go into a playoff. And a couple of them, like the Eagles and Pittsburgh and maybe New England, were not truly playoff teams. Mm-hmm. This Eagles team was not a playoff caliber team. This is a team that pieced together 9 wins. Yes, they had a weaker schedule at the end that helped them, but you can only play who's on your schedule, who did a lot of good things. And they were not a playoff team. They were playing the defending world champions, and they were a team that snuck in because of the extra team. And look how the games went. The networks were going crazy. New England was killed by Buffalo. The Eagles were annihilated by Tampa Bay. And then Sunday night, the Steelers were ripped apart to shreds by Kansas City. I mean, these games weren't close. Why? Because they were not legitimate playoff teams. That's what you get. You're going to have one-sided games like that. But I kept thinking all week, my feeling was, I think the Eagles can score some points on them. I think that Hurst can have a big day, and maybe if they get Miles Sanders back, he can do something. But I kept saying, but how are they going to stop the GOAT and Gronk and the people that I named? I didn't think. I said to Cindy, leaving the house, I said, I think they have maybe a 10% chance of winning, but everything's got to go right. And the other thing that worried me, and if you look at playoff teams, you look at teams that go far, and you go down the various statistical categories. What are they on? Where do they rank on offense? Where do they rank on defense? What is their third down efficiency? Their fourth downs, sacks yielded. But one of the biggest categories is turnover differential. Mm-hmm. And going into this game, the Bucs were +10 and the Eagles were 0. And coming out of this game, the Bucs were +13 and the Eagles were -3 on the season. So those are the things that worried me.
Well, Merrill, it's been real, man. I know we could do an hour. You and I get together talking football. It's always a pleasure. I know that my viewers enjoyed this night. Hey, listen, it's a shame that it's over.
It is, and you know what? It's always a learning class. It's like being in a master class when I'm sitting here and listening to Seth Joyner, because you know this game so well and you know it from so many aspects. I mean, you can tear apart a defense with a lot more skill and knowledge than I can. I can tell when somebody is beaten. I can tell when they blitz and they shouldn't. You can't blitz a Brady, but at the same time, you have been there, done that. I always wished that you had gone into coaching. I think you would have been a great head coach. I think you would have been an amazing defensive coordinator, but you're also a wonderful broadcaster. So it's always an honor and a pleasure to be here with you.
Well, thank you, Merrill. And you know what? As far as, getting into coaching, the train hadn't left the station yet. If the right opportunity presents itself, I'll jump in and I'll do it. Good. But my friend, as always, it's a pleasure having you on. I look forward to the weather getting better in Philadelphia in the next couple of months. We got to get out and play some golf.
Let's do it.
And hang out. We'll talk some football on the golf course, talk about how he did right and what he did wrong in the offseason and the prospects for the upcoming 2022 season. Good. But as always, I tell my guests, our time is our most valuable commodity. And I thank you for the last 63 minutes just talking Eagles.
Was that 63 minutes? It seemed like about 10 minutes, Seth.
Hey, you got good content, when you go over your hour and your producer's looking at you. Zach James is looking at me like, all right, cut it off already.
Wrap it up.
Thank
you, Seth.
Thank you, Merrill. I appreciate it. Well, guys, that's it for this week's show. Thank you all for tuning in and making the show what it's been this year. Hey, listen, I'm not going anywhere. I'll be here every Tuesday. Every once in a while, I'll take a week off, to go on vacation or something like that. But I'll be right here next week. We'll talk a little bit of birds. But I think, moving forward until we get to the combine and the draft, we'll talk about, these teams that are remaining in the playoffs and talk about their chances and things of that nature next week until we officially get into the offseason. But as always, take care of each other and be good to each other. But most importantly, make sure you love each other. Thanks for tuning in. I'll see you guys right here next week, same place, same time. Peace.